Interpretation of Ardra Nakshatra. When the moon is placed in Ardra Nakshatra and supported by benefics like Jupiter or Venus, it channels deep emotional intelligence, resilience, and a transformative mindset. Ruled by Rahu and symbolized by the teardrop, Ardra represents storms, both literal and emotional, that clear the path for regeneration. A benefic moon here allows the native to navigate emotional intensity with insight and become a compassionate transformer or social reformer. However, if afflicted by Saturn, Mars, or Ketu, the moon in Ardra may lead to emotional volatility, suppressed grief, or chaos in relationships. Venus in Ardra intensifies attraction to the unconventional, mysterious, or emotionally complex. When placed well, especially in trinal or angular houses and supported by Jupiter or Mercury, Venus in Ardra fosters emotional depth in love, a taste for bold artistic themes, and a capacity for healing through beauty. But under malefic influence, Venus in Ardra may indulge in destructive relationships, obsession with taboo desires, or erratic romantic behavior masked by charm and sophistication. Jupiter in Ardra adds philosophical weight to the Nakshatra's capacity for disruption and renewal. A benefic Jupiter placed in Kendra or Kona can create a visionary teacher, rebel philosopher, or someone who uses pain to uplift others. Ardra's regenerative storm becomes a force of wisdom when Jupiter supports it. However, if afflicted or in Dusthana houses, Jupiter in Ardra can turn into a belief challenger who becomes cynical, overly skeptical, or confused about moral direction. Mars in Ardra brings an aggressive edge to emotional processing. Ardra's Rahu-ruled instability fuses with Martian force to produce energetic but often unpredictable behavior. When well placed, Mars here provides fearlessness in dealing with crisis, medical emergencies, or social injustice. The native becomes a reformer or problem solver under pressure. But when Mars is afflicted or placed in the 6th or 8th, it may produce impulsive anger, emotional suppression, or sudden destructive outbursts. Saturn in Ardra, when placed with dignity, brings structure to chaos. This placement often appears in the charts of those who work in crisis management, psychology, or long-term reform movements. However, Saturn's cold nature amplifies Ardra's emotional burden, especially if afflicted or placed in the 12th. This leads to internal emotional lockdown, delayed emotional healing, or deep-rooted sorrow that is difficult to express. Saturn can discipline Ardra, but often through trials. Rahu, as Ardra's ruler, placed within its own nakshatra, magnifies the storm-like nature of this placement. In strength, it gives originality, technological brilliance, and the power to shake the status quo. When supported by Mercury or Venus and placed in a Kendra, Rahu and Ardra can produce futuristic thinkers, inventors, or revolutionary communicators. However, if afflicted or placed in Dusthana houses, Rahu and Ardra becomes dangerously erratic, manifesting as manipulation, identity crises, or disconnection from emotional reality. Ketu in Ardra creates internalized transformation. The native is often karmically inclined toward detachment from emotional drama, but may experience repeated upheavals as part of spiritual purging. When placed in a strong house and supported by Jupiter, Ketu and Ardra may create mystics, trauma healers, or those who work with ancestral or psychological pain. But if afflicted, it may result in nihilism, detachment from relationships, or emotional numbness hidden behind intellectualization. Mercury in Ardra becomes razor-sharp, intuitive, and versatile when supported by benefics. This placement excels in fields involving analysis, communication, or crisis solving. Mercury's quick mind finds fertile ground in Ardra's desire to understand pain and dismantle illusions. However, if Mercury is afflicted, especially by Rahu or Saturn, it may turn restless, deceptive, or mentally unstable. Such a native may overthink, spiral emotionally, or struggle with obsessive thought patterns. Interpretation of Ardra Nakshatra, house placement context. When Rahu, the ruler of Ardra Nakshatra, is placed in a Kendra 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, or Kona 1st, 5th, 9th, Ardra's transformative and disruptive tendencies gain momentum for social impact and personal reinvention. For example, for Gemini ascendant, if Rahu is in the 10th house and the moon is in Ardra, the native is often seen as a radical force in their profession. Ardra's symbolism of storms becomes a tool for career disruption, bringing innovation, reform, or activism in public roles. If Venus is placed in Ardra and rules the 5th and 12th houses for Capricorn ascendant, and is itself located in the 9th house, Kona, this combination expresses Ardra's intensity through creative learning, spiritual artistry, or teaching that revolves around healing and emotional transformation. The 9th house uplifts Venusian sensitivity, while Ardra's influence adds emotional gravity and insight into taboo or hidden topics, often making the native a cultural reformer or deep-thinking artist. When Ardra-linked planetary lords are placed in Dusthana houses, 6th, 8th, or 12th, the native may face emotional disorientation, hidden crises, or karmic pain. Suppose Mercury is in Ardra and rules the 2nd and 5th houses for Virgo ascendant and is placed in the 8th house. This makes for a mind that is probing, investigative, and obsessed with uncovering truth beneath appearances, but often through turbulent life experiences. Speech, intelligence, or self-worth may undergo periodic destruction and rebirth. Now consider Saturn in Ardra for Cancer ascendant, ruling the 7th and 8th houses, and placed in the 6th house. This brings deep karmic tests around partnerships, emotional responsibilities, and health. Ardra's nature to purify through upheaval finds structure in Saturn's delayed lessons. Here, the native may find themselves constantly confronting emotional burdens in service-related environments or in intimate relationships, often learning slowly through emotional endurance. If Jupiter is in Ardra for Aquarius ascendant, ruling the 2nd and 11th houses, and is placed in the 4th house, the native may become a philosophical or spiritual counselor who works from home or in nurturing environments. Ardra's probing mind fuses with Jupiter's expansive wisdom, creating a seeker of truth who uplifts others by sharing what they've endured. The 4th house stabilizes Ardra's emotional chaos, granting inner peace through wisdom and service. Suppose Mars is in Ardra for Leo ascendant, ruling the 4th and 9th houses, and is placed in the 1st house, Kendra. This gives the native a fiery, reform-oriented personality. Ardra's razor sharp will become part of their core identity. They may be perceived as intense, action-oriented, and unafraid to confront emotional or social storms. When Mars is dignified and unafflicted, this placement produces highly dynamic change agents with strong personal magnetism. If Ketu is in Ardra and Rahu, its ruler, is placed in the 12th house for Taurus ascendant, the native may be drawn toward mystical studies, foreign lands, or karmic isolation. Ardra's tendency for emotional clearing becomes internalized through Ketu, often leading to past life trauma resolution, silent suffering, or a reclusive personality. Yet, if Rahu were instead placed in the 1st or 5th, this placement could give psychic insight or spiritual intelligence, especially in healing or occult fields. Finally, if the moon is in Ardra for Aries ascendant and rules the 4th house, but is placed in the 7th house, this creates emotional partnerships that involve deep transformation. The native may attract intense or emotionally volatile relationships that serve as catalysts for personal healing. Ardra's teardrop symbolism plays out in interpersonal dynamics, where connection requires honesty, breakdown, and rebirth. With Benefic support, this becomes a path of profound emotional maturity. Interpretation of Shatabhisha Nakshatra. When the moon is placed in Shatabhisha Nakshatra and supported by benefics like Rahu, its ruler, or Saturn, it cultivates a deeply introspective, emotionally aloof yet spiritually investigative nature. Ruled by Rahu and symbolized by a circle of 100 healers or stars, Shatabhisha carries the Shakti of concealment and healing. A benefic moon here provides detachment, scientific acumen, emotional intelligence expressed through independence, and an ability to work behind the scenes. If afflicted, especially by Saturn, Mars, or Ketu, the moon can manifest as emotional isolation, difficulty trusting others, or suppressed grief masked by hyper-rationality. Venus in Shatabhisha brings cool charm, social refinement, and unique aesthetic preferences. When placed in Kendra or Kona and supported by Rahu or Mercury, Venus here makes emotionally eccentric artists, intuitive counselors, or lovers of mystical knowledge and abstract beauty. But when afflicted, Venus may show emotional detachment in relationships, confusion around intimacy, or cold charm that conceals inner wounds. Jupiter in Shatabhisha gives futuristic thinkers, spiritual healers, or unconventional guides. It blends traditional wisdom with Rahu's futuristic orientation. When strong, it creates mentors who break conventions to guide others through unseen realms, like astrology, metaphysics, alternative medicine. However, when afflicted, Jupiter here can become self-righteous, emotionally isolated in belief, or dogmatic in intellectual nonconformity. Mars in Shatabhisha generates high drive for exploration, whether scientific, technological, or personal. When well placed, Mars fuels a desire to break societal limitations through innovation or research. These individuals can be emotionally self-sufficient, protective of their space, and productive in solitude. If afflicted, especially by Saturn or Ketu, this Mars may lead to social rebellion, emotional suppression, or aggressive nonconformism. Saturn in Shatabhisha brings responsibility towards social reform, healing systems, or karmic correction. Saturn here makes emotionally serious individuals with a strong moral code, especially around truth, privacy, and ethics. When dignified, it produces scientists, reformers, or disciplined loners. If afflicted, it may lead to depression, emotional rigidity, or karmic burdens related to authority and detachment. Rahu, the Nakshatra lord, when placed in Shatabhisha, intensifies the native's curiosity about the forbidden, futuristic, or spiritually invisible. A well-supported Rahu gives breakthroughs in healing, psychology, or digital innovation. But when afflicted, Rahu here may cause identity confusion, emotional alienation, or obsession with control and secrecy. Ketu in Shatabhisha withdraws from societal roles to focus inwardly on healing or detachment. These natives are highly intuitive and often carry spiritual gifts that are hard to articulate. If supported, Ketu brings liberation through solitude, mysticism, or ancient healing techniques. If afflicted, it can produce emotional numbness, social withdrawal, or karmic loops related to abandonment or alienation. Mercury in Shatabhisha makes intelligent, sharp-minded communicators, researchers, or digital visionaries. Speech is analytical, emotionally cool, and often masked by intellectual tone. When supported, it produces excellent astrologers, analysts, or writers. If afflicted, especially by Rahu or Saturn, Mercury may express as cynical speech, nervous detachment, or emotional miscommunication that hides vulnerability behind data or logic. Interpretation of Shatabhisha Nakshatra, house placement context. When Rahu, the ruler of Shatabhisha Nakshatra, is placed in a Kendra 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, or Kona 1st, 5th, 9th, the native gains access to unique karmic momentum, abstract intelligence, and emotional transformation through non-conventional routes. For Aquarius ascendant, if Rahu is placed in the 10th house and the moon is in Shatabhisha, the native may achieve recognition through unconventional professions, technology, medicine, astrology, or social reform. The moon here expresses emotional need for solitude, yet functions publicly in roles requiring intellectual detachment and systemic insight. If supported by Saturn or Mercury, the person becomes a calm reformer. If afflicted, it may lead to loneliness under public success or disconnection from emotions. If Venus is in Shatabhisha and rules the 4th and 9th houses for Capricorn ascendant, and is placed in the 5th house, Kona, the native expresses emotional subtlety through art, speculative thinking, or metaphysical interests. Love and beauty are viewed through a philosophical lens, often cool, refined, and intellectually detached. If Venus is supported by Rahu or Mercury, this gives emotionally mature creators, healers, or counselors. If afflicted, the native may struggle with intimacy or idealism, clashing with logic. When a planet in Shatabhisha has its ruler placed in a Dusthana house, 6th, 8th, or 12th, the themes of emotional healing, karmic purification, and isolation intensify. For example, if Mercury is in Shatabhisha and rules the 2nd and 5th houses for Taurus ascendant, but Rahu is placed in the 8th house, the native may have karmic patterns around speech, family legacy, or hidden communication talents. The person could become a researcher, writer, or psychologist who uncovers truth, but might also face emotional distancing or betrayal that refines their emotional expression. Consider Mars in Shatabhisha for Leo ascendant, ruling the 4th and 9th houses, and placed in the 1st house, Kendra. The native has a pioneering identity, emotionally self-sufficient, mentally sharp, and slightly aloof. Mars energizes Rahu's drive for reform, and the 1st house makes the native stand apart in appearance and approach. If afflicted, this combination may manifest as confrontational independence, emotional impulsiveness, or a rebellious attitude toward traditional authority. If Saturn is in Shatabhisha and rules the 6th and 7th houses, for Cancer ascendant, and is placed in the 12th house, the native deals with emotional burdens tied to service, isolation, or karmic debts in partnerships. Saturn in this position may create spiritual discipline or push the native toward institutional healing, monasteries, hospitals, retreats. If afflicted, it can bring chronic loneliness, emotional suppression, or spiritual heaviness. When supported by Jupiter or Moon, however, it gives maturity and inner healing power. Suppose Jupiter is in Shatabhisha and rules the 1st and 4th houses, for Pisces ascendant, and is placed in the 9th house, Kona. The native becomes a visionary teacher, emotionally driven by universal knowledge and futuristic ethics. They might blend Vedic wisdom with modern sciences, becoming influential in spiritual or academic reform. If afflicted, Jupiter may express as aloof idealism or emotional rigidity in beliefs. If Ketu is in Shatabhisha and Rahu is in the 2nd house for Aquarius ascendant, the native withdraws from material attachments, family structures, or traditional speech norms. Ketu here gives intuitive knowing, emotional introspection, and internalized detachment. If well supported, the native becomes a silent healer, spiritual guide, or scientific seer. If afflicted, it can cause speech disorders, estrangement from family, or disinterest in wealth. Finally, if the moon is in Shatabhisha for Aries ascendant and rules the 4th house, placed in the 11th house, the native finds emotional security in collective ideas, virtual spaces, or futuristic goals. The person may feel more connected to ideals than to people. If the moon is strong, this placement supports technology-based careers, group healing work, or humanitarian service. If afflicted, it may cause a feeling of isolation even in social settings, emotional dependency on digital validation, or difficulty in forming grounded personal bonds. Interpretation of Swati Nakshatra. When the moon is placed in Swati Nakshatra and supported by benefics like Mercury or Venus, it brings emotional independence, grace, and an inherent adaptability. Ruled by Rahu and symbolized by the young sprout swaying in the wind, Swati is the nakshatra of movement, learning, and refined balance. A benefic moon here gives the native emotional flexibility, charm in social interactions, and the ability to maintain harmony while navigating personal freedom. However, if afflicted, especially by Saturn, Ketu, or Mars, the moon in Swati may result in inner restlessness, passive aggressiveness, or a scattered emotional identity hidden behind a polite exterior. Venus in Swati enhances diplomacy, attraction, and intellectual refinement. When placed in Kendra or Kona and supported by Mercury or Jupiter, Venus here produces graceful speakers, designers, or counselors who charm with sophistication and fairness. Swati's air element elevates Venus's aesthetic intelligence. But when afflicted, Venus may seek superficial peace, become codependent in relationships, or waver in decisions due to fear of confrontation. Jupiter in Swati gives a deep curiosity for philosophy, law, and universal values, expressed through communication and learning. A strong Jupiter here nurtures the qualities of a teacher, arbitrator, or spiritual seeker who bridges cultural or moral divides. If placed in Dusthana or afflicted, Jupiter may struggle with inconsistency in belief, difficulty asserting faith, or moral compromise to maintain false peace or external validation. Mars in Swati drives the desire for intellectual freedom, justice, and pioneering ideas. When placed strongly, Mars here produces courageous reformers, strategists, or skilled negotiators who fight gracefully but persistently. Swati tempers Mars's aggression into tactful assertion. However, when afflicted, Mars may cause indecisiveness masked by aggression, passive rebellion, or suppression of anger that eventually erupts in volatile bursts. Saturn in Swati grants endurance in intellectual work, long-term learning, or social negotiations. In strong positions, it creates patient diplomats, legal minds, or spiritual practitioners devoted to justice and balance. However, Saturn's heaviness may also burden Swati's airy nature. If afflicted, it can cause mental rigidity, fear of change, or difficulty asserting boundaries, often leading to internal pressure from trying to keep everyone satisfied. Rahu in Swati, in its own nakshatra, magnifies the desire for individuality, fame, and mastery over communication or performance. Supported by Venus or Mercury, Rahu in Swati produces persuasive speakers, broadcasters, or performers who thrive in public roles. However, if afflicted, Rahu here may distort identity, create inconsistency in partnerships, or cause manipulation through flattery, false promises, or shape-shifting behavior in social settings. Ketu in Swati brings detachment from public image, social identity, or external recognition. The native may feel inwardly aloof from crowds despite being socially adept. When supported, this placement gives clarity in communication, minimalism in social needs, or silent leadership. If afflicted, Ketu in Swati may cause social withdrawal, difficulty expressing thoughts, or resistance to adaptability, turning Swati's gift for movement into resistance. Mercury in Swati is naturally powerful, blending intellectual agility with persuasive speech. When benefically placed, it gives writers, lawyers, translators, or negotiators who use words as tools of harmony and justice. Mercury in Swati can thrive in commerce, media, or law. But if afflicted, especially by Rahu or Saturn, it may produce anxiety, mental indecision, or manipulation masked as diplomacy. Communication becomes fragmented or too calculated, lacking authentic emotional engagement. Interpretation of Swati Nakshatra house placement context. When Rahu, the ruler of Swati Nakshatra, is placed in a Kendra, 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, or Kona, 1st, 5th, 9th, Swati's themes of independence, balance, and mastery in communication gain structure and public influence. For instance, for Libra ascendant, if Rahu is in the 10th house and Moon is in Swati, the native may achieve recognition through adaptable communication, intellectual branding, or strategic alliances. Rahu's placement in a Kendra gives Swati's airy independence a purpose, channeling it toward professional growth, innovation, or public reform. If Venus is in Swati and rules the 1st and 8th houses for Taurus ascendant and is placed in the 5th house, Kona, the native may express Swati's grace through creative arts, eloquent teaching, or romantic idealism. The 5th house strengthens Swati's communication gift and gives a platform for Venus to express refined love, charm, and artistic beauty. The native is likely to attract attention in performance, fashion, or emotionally expressive roles that value tact and polish. When the lord of a Swati-placed planet is in a Dusthana house, 6th, 8th, or 12th, the native may experience inner tension between maintaining harmony and facing unavoidable karmic pressures. For example, if Mercury is in Swati and rules the 2nd and 5th houses for Virgo ascendant, but Mercury is placed in the 6th house, the native may face verbal conflicts, health stress due to mental overwork, or challenges in expressing themselves authentically. Swati's balance-seeking nature feels strained in competitive or hostile environments, often resulting in suppressed resentment or people-pleasing behavior. Now consider Jupiter in Swati for Aquarius ascendant, ruling the 2nd and 11th houses, and placed in the 9th house, Kona. This placement beautifully aligns Swati's airy intelligence with Jupiter's higher wisdom. The native becomes a cultured speaker, balanced thinker, or educator who bridges traditional belief systems with progressive vision. The 9th house channels Swati's elegance toward dharmic communication, diplomacy in legal or moral frameworks, and international influence. If Mars is in Swati and rules the 5th and 10th houses for Cancer ascendant and is placed in the 12th house, the native may direct energy into foreign ventures, spiritual learning, or subtle activism. Mars here blends with Swati's detachment to pursue individualistic goals behind the scenes. When supported, this Mars gives visionary courage in private service, institutions, or hidden reforms. If afflicted, however, the native may feel disconnected from ambition, with frustration manifesting as escapism, indecision, or passive conflict. Suppose Saturn is in Swati and rules the 4th and 5th houses for Capricorn ascendant and is placed in the 8th house. The native may carry karmic weight around emotional control, ancestral duty, or silent burdens in relationships. Swati's need for open movement becomes locked into secrecy or suppressed expression. If supported, this Saturn grants mastery in emotional depth and legal reform. If afflicted, it may lead to isolation, silent suffering, or inability to balance emotional loyalty with personal freedom. If Ketu is in Swati and Rahu is placed in the 2nd house for Aries ascendant, the native may feel inwardly detached from social image, but outwardly driven to speak, accumulate wealth, or influence others through voice and values. Ketu in Swati may manifest as an aloof intellectual or reclusive communicator, while Rahu in the second pushes the person to refine their message and build a legacy through speech. If afflicted, this can lead to identity confusion or difficulty trusting others in communication. Finally, if the moon is in Swati for Gemini ascendant and rules the second house, placed in the 11th house, the native becomes emotionally attuned to group dynamics, audience appeal, and refined speech. This moon supports networking, media influence, or advisory roles, where emotional tone and linguistic elegance define success. If the moon is afflicted, the person may oscillate between social craving and emotional detachment, struggling to find inner peace despite external likability.